Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees. Tonight's top story. More than 40 countries have committed to phase out coal use at COP26. Dozens of countries and finance institutions committed to end funding for fossil fuel.
Today, I think we can say that the end of coal is in sight.
Also in Glasgow, we hear from the counter COP26 forum, where experts discussed alternative views on net zero and other climate policies. Also tonight, Owen Paterson has resigned as an MP after the government U-turned to allow a fresh vote on his suspension. He is alleged to have broken lobbying rules. Poland and other nations on Thursday pledged to phase out their use of coal-fired power and stop building new plants. COP26 host Britain described the non-binding commitment as putting the end of coal in sight. But on the other side of the planet, more coal power stations are opening up, largely due to China's coal-fueled industry. Global CO2 emissions have been rapidly rebounding to pre-pandemic level. NTD's David English has the story.
From the global power sector.
The UK government announced on Thursday that several major coal-using nations have pledged for the first time to phase out their use of the fossil fuel or to speed up existing plans to do so. Among them are major coal users such as Poland, Vietnam and Chile.
Today, I think we can say that the end of coal is in sight. The progress we've seen over the past 2 years would have seemed like a lofty ambition when we took on the COP presidency back in 2019.
At least 25 countries, including the US, committed to ending public financing for unabated fossil fuel projects abroad by the end of the next year. Unabated fossil fuel refers to the burning of coal, oil and natural gas without using technology to capture the CO2 emissions.
And so today, we are publishing the Global Coal to Clean Power Transition Statement, a commitment to end coal investment, to scale up clean power, to make a just transition, and phase out coal in the 2030s in major economies and in the 2040s elsewhere.
The commitments are not binding. Some signatories say they will not be able to phase out coal without sufficient financial help from other countries. They need significant investments to shift their industries and energy sectors to cleaner sources.
But our ability to do so will be determined by the extent of support that we receive from developed economies.
Meanwhile, China's coal production is busier than ever. In the Shanxi region in the north of the country, 2 new coal power stations are in operation, while an existing one is adding extra capacity. One coal seller says he had not heard of COP26, but knows that his livelihood depends on being able to sell the fuel.
My whole family sells coal. My son, my daughter, and I. We've sold coal our whole lives.
A local carbon consultant says getting rid of coal in China is not a quick task, especially when global energy prices are soaring.
You can't reduce coal from tomorrow. It's impossible. I think the government targets are reasonable. We can't let people suffer coldness and starvation now because of climate change. It's unreasonable.
A new scientific study has found that the dramatic drop in CO2 emissions due to the pandemic lockdowns has pretty much disappeared in a puff of coal-fired smoke, much of it from China. David English, NTD News.
Britain's NatWest banking group says it won't lend to any new customers operating coal-fired power plants, nor will it lend to existing customers wanting to increase their capacity. Chief Executive Alison Rose says NatWest will phase out all lending to coal companies in the UK by 2024 and globally by 2030. HSBC, Fidelity International and Lloyds Banking Group are also joining the Powering Past Coal Alliance. Over the next decade, the UN's World Meteorological Organization plans to boost weather monitoring in 75 small island nations and least developed countries. The goal is to plug gaps in data collection so developing countries can improve livelihoods and better prepare for severe weather events. 3 UN organizations presented their plans at COP26 yesterday. NTD's Livelihoods tells us more.
3 UN agencies at the Climate Summit on Wednesday announced a funding initiative to improve weather forecasting in developing countries. The goal is to plug gaps in data collection so that developing countries can improve livelihoods and better prepare for severe weather events.
We have to invest in weather and climate services and also observations. And without observations, we are not able to provide good services. In modeling, we say that if you put the junk in your forecasting models, you are getting junk out. And unfortunately, that's the situation in several developing countries.
Over the next decade, the UN's World Meteorological Organization, or WMO, plans to boost weather monitoring in 75 small island nations and least developed countries. Improving rain forecasts can help farmers manage their fields, communities manage water resources, or governments plan for food imports when yields look likely to falter. Better forecasts also help communities to prepare for possible flooding or storms.
I believe the most effective protection we can give our people in the face of serious storms is timely knowledge. That is early warning.
The initiative falls under global plans to provide over £70 billion a year in climate financing to poorer nations. Lily Zhou, NTD News.
Governments and big investors announced new plans on Wednesday to commit trillions of pounds in the global transition to renewable energy and other so-called green initiatives. A key focus was given to supporting developing countries and emerging markets through investments and by providing finance. NTD's Malcolm Hudson takes us through some of the details of their plans.
A common theme at the Climate Summit yesterday was encompassed by Chancellor Rishi Sunak's goal: rewire the global financial system.
So our third action is to rewire the entire global financial system for net zero. Better and more consistent climate data, sovereign green bonds, mandatory sustainability disclosures, proper climate risk surveillance, stronger global reporting standards.
Developed countries committed £73 billion to developing countries as part of their climate finance delivery goal. This was set out in 2009 and is planned to be completed before 2025.
There's no doubt that we need to have a complete transformation, deep transformation of the economies, and that includes, of course, the private sector.
Over £95 trillion of private finance was committed to net zero targets through the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, or GFANZ. GFANZ members, including banks, credit agencies, asset managers and audit firms, are required to submit robust targets. More than 90 have already done so. Their key focus is supporting developing countries. This has marked a dramatic shift in global investments.
And I remember when I started in the city in the 1990s. Clearly climate finance, investing in green was not mainstream. I do believe it is now mainstream.
The International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation established a board to develop global sustainability reporting standards and provide a framework for countries to follow. This was welcomed by finance ministers and central bank governors from 35 countries. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News.
Police made 5 arrests as hundreds of climate activists marched through Glasgow on Wednesday evening. 2 of the arrests took place after a number of officers were sprayed with paint. Scores of protesters trying to get to the venue scuffled with police. Activists from Extinction Rebellion demonstrated against greenwashing. The term greenwashing refers to environmental policies and pledges that do not result in the protesters' desired actions. One of the many protests taking place outside COP this week. This particular protest came as governments and investors at the summit announced plans to pour trillions of pounds into reaching net zero targets. While there are growing concerns that dissenting views about climate change are being shut down, just down the road from COP26 in Glasgow, a group of analysts and experts scrutinised the UN's climate policies at a counter COP26 event. It comes as net zero policies begin to be implemented around the world and unprecedented levels of investment are announced. NTD's Jane Worrell is in Glasgow and met with speakers from the Climate Reality Forum.
Well, as world leaders and thousands of others gathered here in Glasgow for the COP26 summit, a counter COP26 summit was happening at the same time, hosted by the American think tank the Heartland Institute, with experts from the US, here in the UK and Europe. They say that more scrutiny is needed and questioned exactly how environmentally friendly the UN climate policies actually are.
I'm very concerned about the environment. That's why I'm opposing carbon dioxide restrictions, because their proposed solution is wind and solar power, both of which have extreme negative environmental consequences. Wind power, for example, peer-reviewed study by Harvard University scientists finds that to replace conventional electricity in America with wind turbines, you'd have to cover a third of our country with wind turbines. And if you mandate electrified vehicles, now you have to make it half the country. That would be absolutely devastating to wildlife, to ecosystems, to our natural beauty, to anything that you treasure about the environment.
Researchers have mixed views on whether solar panels are actually good for the environment. Lord Monckton's view is that net zero solutions at the UN conference are actually net adders.
But if your aim is to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, then wind and solar power are not the best way to do it. And solar power has an additional difficulty in which the 6,000 degrees Celsius at which the polysilicon must be baked consumes so much energy when you make the solar panel that it will not, in its entire lifetime, produce as much energy as the energy that was required to produce the solar panel. And that means that all solar panels are also net adders of CO2 to the atmosphere.
There are also differing views on how much of the change in the Earth's temperature is actually caused by man. Over 2 days, the forum presented data and science, countering what they call the alarmism presented at the UN summit. They're concerned there isn't an open scientific debate on climate change policies.
Whatever your particular policy agenda is, it always helps to have people questioning that and to ask difficult questions. But there's such a momentum now, there's such a groupthink in the main COP conference that they can't ask these searching questions. So that's what we're doing here at the Climate Reality Forum.
They also question the human rights issues involved in the solar panel production chain.
China has basically a monopoly on cobalt coming from the Congo, allegations of child labor from groups like Amnesty International. Then you even go to China, the solar panels, the Uyghur slaves, they're Muslim Uyghur slaves in China that they're using. And the Biden administration is willing to give it a complete pass on all human rights violations if China will just sign on to the climate agenda. So what's happening here is people are willing to get energy that's coming from countries that are hostile regimes and countries with horrible human rights record and horrible environmental standards, all because of this utopian vision that we're going to solve climate change.
Craig Rucker from CFACT says the economic costs involved in switching to net zero could prove unpopular with voters.
I think there's a disconnect. I think among those who maybe are in the educated elite, maybe government officials, same dichotomy that you see in the United States. There's a lot of support from it, kind of intellectual, but among the grassroots, the plumbers, the workers, the carpenters, which are a lot of the people that we wound up staying without in Prestwick, I think they see through it. And they do not support their country driving up utility prices. And I don't think they buy the climate alarm nonsense that we're all going to die in 12 years.
And within Parliament, Boris Johnson may be facing political challenges too, with MPs recently forming a net zero scrutiny group. Jane Worrell, NTD News in Glasgow.
Still to come, Moscow is denying US media reports of a Russian troop buildup near the Ukrainian border. This comes as Russia's Gazprom is cutting gas exports to Europe. That and more after the break. MP Owen Paterson, who is facing possible suspension over allegations of breaking lobbying rules, has resigned. His resignation comes on the same day the government backed down on its plans to reform the standards process for MPs. Conservative MPs voted on Wednesday to overhaul the disciplinary process to block Paterson from being immediately suspended. Now, the government will seek cross-party agreement on potential reforms. NTD's Eddie Aiken brings us this report.
Owen Paterson has resigned from his role as MP for North Shropshire. He had been at the centre of a row over reforms to the disciplinary process for MPs. In a statement, he said the last 2 years had been an indescribable nightmare for him and his family. He had faced a 30-day suspension after being found by the Parliamentary Committee on Standards to have allegedly breached lobbying rules. Paterson says the investigation was unfairly conducted and played a major role in his wife's suicide last year. Conservative MPs on Wednesday blocked Paterson's suspension by voting to overhaul the disciplinary system and allow a review of his case.
He had no right of appeal, and we feel that in terms of Parliament, people should have a right of appeal, as they do in most employments throughout this country.
Thank you, Mr.
It was the first time in decades that lawmakers have not followed through on the Standards Committee's recommendations. And on Thursday, the government backtracked after widespread outrage. The leader of the Commons told MPs he would seek cross-party changes to the system.
Mr. Speaker, I am also aware that last night's vote has created a certain amount of controversy. It is important that standards in this House are done on a cross-party basis.
The government proposed a new appeals system, but opposition parties refused to take part in a Tory-led committee to set it up. The Commons leader admitted any overhaul of the standards process should not be based on just one case. He said the government will bring forward more detailed proposals after cross-party discussions.
While there is a very strong feeling on both sides of the House that there is a need for an appeals process, there is equally a strong feeling that this should not be based on a single case or applied retrospectively. I fear last night's debate conflated the individual case with the general concern.
Labour MPs were furious before the vote yesterday.
In no other profession in our country could someone be found guilty by an independent process and just have their mates vote them back into the job. When they break the rules, Mr. Speaker, they just remake the rules. Yeah.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson showed his support for Paterson before the vote took place.
With the issues in this case, which involved a serious family tragedy, Mr. Speaker, is whether a member of this House had a fair opportunity to make representations in this case, or whether as a matter of natural justice, our procedures in this House allow for proper appeal, Mr. Speaker.
The Commissioner's investigation alleged Paterson repeatedly lobbied for 2 companies paying him more than £100,000 per year. In his resignation statement, Paterson maintained his innocence, saying that he acted at all times in the interests of public health and safety. He said under the current system he was unable to clear his name through the courts. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen urges governmental oversight of Facebook's announcement to scrap its facial recognition system. Before a meeting with Germany's Justice Minister, she said such a step is necessary to make sure the company does what it has promised. Earlier in the week, she also urged her former boss, Mark Zuckerberg, to step down and make way for changes. This story comes from NTD's Cost M&S.
Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen welcomed the social media company's announcement that it would scrap facial recognition, but urged close government oversight of the move to ensure the social network lived up to its pledge. Facebook said it will delete the face prints of more than 1 billion people.
I strongly encourage governmental oversight. Like when they say we've gotten rid of this, what does that really mean? I think there needs to be more transparency into how their operations work to make sure that they actually follow through on something like that.
Haugen was speaking to media before meeting Germany's Justice Minister Christine Lambrecht on Wednesday. She said that compared with the United States' more rigid rules-based approach, principles-based regulation in the EU and UK was more effective in constraining technology companies.
The reality of technology is that if you draw a fence, it's very easy to figure out a way around the fence. But with principles or with things like risk assessments, they can be dynamic and they can be flexible over time.
Facebook announced last week it will rebrand the company as Meta. On Monday, speaking at a tech conference in Portugal, Haugen urged her former boss Mark Zuckerberg to step down and allow change rather than devoting resources to a rebrand.
I think it is unlikely the company will change if he remains the CEO. And I hope that he can see that there's so much good he could do in the world, and maybe it's a chance for someone else to maybe take the reins.
Facebook is facing perhaps its biggest public relations crisis to date. Leaked documents from Haugen showed it has known about the harms its products cause, but often did little or nothing to mitigate them. Zuckerberg has said the leaked documents were being used to paint a false picture. Cost Jimenez, NTD News.
Russia on Wednesday denied US media reports of a Russian troop buildup near the Ukrainian border. It comes amid Russia's Gazprom cutting gas exports to Europe, which is seen as a way of putting pressure on Germany to approve a new gas pipeline. We've got more from NTD's David English.
Russia's foreign ministry on Wednesday dismissed reports that it's amassing troops and ramping up military equipment near the border with Ukraine.
It wasn't just one fake. It was a whole fresh fake campaign in the US media.
US outlets reported satellite photos allegedly showing a Russian troop buildup near the Ukraine border. Ukraine has also denied those reports. That's after the Ukrainian defense minister saying on Tuesday that 90,000 Russian troops are currently stationed in the area. The ministry said Russia has left some of its military units about 160 miles near Ukraine after recent military drills.
It should be noted that the Russian Federation periodically resorts to the practice of transferring and accumulating military units in order to maintain tensions in the region and political pressure on neighboring states.
A top US general said on Wednesday the Pentagon is monitoring the situation, but he's not sure what to make of it. This spring, Moscow alarmed Kiev and Western capitals by building up more than 100,000 troops along the border with Ukraine. This comes as Russia is cutting gas exports to Europe. On Monday, state-controlled Gazprom halved its deliveries to Ukraine and last week cut them completely to a major pipeline that goes from Poland into Germany. This is further boosting Europe's sky-high gas prices. Europe and the US have been accusing Russia of using gas as a political weapon. Russian President Vladimir Putin hinted last month Russia could send more gas to Europe as soon as it gets the green light from Germany for the new Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which goes directly to Germany. Some observers see Gazprom's latest move as a way to pressure Germany to fast-track the approval. David English, NTD News.
Putin said on Wednesday tests of Russia's new hypersonic cruise missile are nearing completion and deliveries to the Navy will begin in 2022. The move is part of a bid by Moscow to forge ahead in a race with the US and others to deploy the next generation of long-range weapons. Hypersonic missiles travel at more than 5 times the speed of sound in the upper atmosphere and are hard to detect or intercept. And finally, a new exhibition is underway in London, celebrating the return of theatre to London's West End after the pandemic. As part of a charity arts project, British photographer Ran King has taken around 150 portraits of people from 60 London shows and venues over the past month. The exhibition features portraits of star cast members, backstage workers and musicians. NTD's Joy Felix brings us more on this.
Photographer Rankin celebrates the return of theatre to London's West End with a new exhibition. London's theatres had to shut their doors for 18 months when the national lockdown started. Rankin hopes the exhibition can mark the end of this difficult period.
The show's all about all of the people that work in the West End, in the theatre, and that's not just the actors, but it's the behind the scenes people, it's the stage managers, the stage door, it's the orchestra, it's whoever works in theatre coming together to celebrate it coming back to life, and also just kind of having a bit of fun because we've had a tough couple of years.
Valerie Antwi and Craig Connolly are currently part of the cast for the Harry Potter and the Cursed Child.
For anything that brings attention back to this industry, where we need audiences to come back and play with us, basically, I think is a great idea.
Yeah, I think it's been such a hard year and a half, and people need the theatre, and we haven't had it for so long, and it's amazing to be back and amazing to have just people back in and listening to the stories and coming on the journey that we have at Harry Potter, and it really is amazing.
The portraits will go on show at the Fuji Film House of Photography and can be viewed for free. In collaboration with the Society of London Theatre and funded by the Mayor of London, the exhibition starts on Thursday and runs until the end of January. Joy Felix, NTD News.
That's the news for today. Have a good evening. Thank you for watching our daily news show on YouTube. You can also watch our other programming on channel 190 on Sky TV or on Freeview via channel box on channel 271. In the meantime though, please give this video a like and hit subscribe to our channel. Have a good day.